The night was unusually quiet in the small, rural town of Willow Creek. The stars above blinked softly, undisturbed by the usual hum of the modern world, a tapestry of cosmic light stretching infinitely across the sky. For Steve Malone, this was just another evening on his farm, a life of routine and solace that he had come to cherish after years of city noise and relentless obligations. His old farmhouse stood sturdy against the dark, surrounded by fields that waved gently in the cool night breeze. Steve sat in his creaky wooden chair on the porch, his trusted dog, Rusty, lying contentedly by his feet. The night was clear, and the air was crisp, the kind of night that begged to be savored with a hot cup of coffee and the distant croak of hawks by the nearby stream. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the land, turning the fields into a sea of shimmering gold. It was peaceful, serene, everything that Steve had always wanted. He was a man of few words, his life defined by simplicity. Steve had chosen this life deliberately, retreating from the complications of society to find solace in the rhythms of nature. The days were long, but they were his, filled with the quiet joy of tending to his crops, repairing fences, and watching the seasons change from the comfort of his porch. It was a life that required little and gave back in abundance, the kind of life that many might find lonely, but one that Steve embraced wholeheartedly. Yet that night something broke the usual tranquility. It started with a distant rumble, barely noticeable at first, but soon growing louder, more insistent. Rusty, ever alert, lifted his head and let out a low, uneasy growl. Steve frowned, setting down his coffee cup as he strained to listen. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard, an unnatural, almost metallic roar that seemed to vibrate through the very earth beneath him. Then, without warning, the sky was split open by a blinding flash of light, a brilliant streak of fire cutting through the heavens. Steve jumped to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the fiery trail carve its way through the sky, heading towards the horizon where his fields met the dense woods beyond. The light was bright enough to turn night into day, and for a moment Steve could only stand there, frozen in awe and fear. He watched as the fireball descended rapidly, trailing smoke and sparks, before it disappeared beyond the tree-line with a deafening crash. The ground shook beneath him, and a rush of hot wind followed, rattling the windows of his house and sending a flock of birds screeching into the night sky. Rusty barked wildly, his instincts telling him something was terribly wrong. Steve's mind raced. Was it a meteor? A plane crash? Whatever it was too close for comfort. He grabbed the flashlight from inside the door and shoved his feet into his boots, the urgency of the situation pulling him into action. He whistled for Rusty, who immediately bolted off the porch, ready to follow. The night was darker now, the moon obscured by the thick plume of smoke rising from where the object had landed. Steve's boots crunched against the gravel path as he hurried towards the site, his flashlight beam cutting through the thickening fog. His breath came in short bursts, a mixture of adrenaline and fear propelling him forward. As he neared the edge of his property, the smell of burning metal filled the air, sharp and acrid. The trees loomed tall and foreboding, their branches swaying in the wake of the abrasion. Steve slowed his pace, his senses heightened, the sounds of the night drowned out by the steady crackle of fire somewhere up ahead. When he reached the clearing, Steve's breath caught in his throat. The sight before him was nothing short of otherworldly. There, nestled among the trees, was the wreckage of something that could only be described as a spacecraft. It was large and sleek, its surface gleaming with an iridescent sheen that reflected the firelight in a myriad of colors. The craft was half buried in the earth, its once glorious form now twisted and broken, with smoke billowing from several gashes along its hull. Steve approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never seen anything like this before, nothing even remotely close. The sheer size of the ship was overwhelming, dwarfing the trees around it. As he moved closer, he could see strange symbols etched into the metal, glowing faintly in the dim light, like some ancient alien script. Rusty stayed close to Steve's side, growling softly as they neared the wreckage. The heat from the fire was intense, but Steve pressed on, his curiosity outweighing his fear. He circled the craft, looking for any signs of life, his mind racing with possibilities. Could there be someone inside? Something? Then he saw a figure barely visible through the thick smoke, lying motionless on the ground near the edge of the wreckage. Steve's breath caught as he hurried over, his flashlight revealing the figure in more detail. It was a woman, or at least she looked like one. Her skin was a soft, pale blue, almost luminous in the dark, with long, silver hair that cascaded around her like a waterfall of light. Her clothes were unlike anything Steve had ever seen, a flowing garment that shimmered like liquid metal, clinging to her slender form. She was beautiful, in a way that was both ethereal and unsettling, as if she belonged to a different world entirely. She was unconscious, her body still and lifeless. Steve knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her shoulder, unsure of what to do. She didn't appear to be breathing, at least not in any way he could recognize, but her skin was warm to the touch. He shook her gently, trying to rouse her, but she remained unresponsive. Panic began to set in. What was he supposed to do? Who was she? What was she? He looked around helplessly, the enormity of the situation beginning to sink in. Here he was, in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, with an alien woman lying unconscious at his feet. Rusty barked sharply, snapping Steve out of his daze. He needed to act and fast. He had no idea what kind of injury she might have or how her physiology worked, but he couldn't just leave her there. With a grunt of effort, Steve slipped his arms under her and lifted her off the bed. She was surprisingly light, her body limp and fragile in his arms. Steve carried her back towards the farmhouse, his mind racing with questions and fears. What if she didn't survive? What if she didn't? As he trudged back through the field, Steve couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even begin to imagine. The farmhouse was a welcome sight as he emerged from the woods, its warm light a beacon in the dark. He hurried inside, careful not to jostle the woman too much. Laying her gently on the couch, Steve stood back, unsure of what to do next. Her breathing, or at least what he assumed was breathing, seemed stable, but she still hadn't regained consciousness. He moved quickly, gathering supplies of first aid kit, blankets, and a basin of water. Steve had no medical training beyond the basics, but he knew he had to try. He cleaned the cuts and bruises on her skin, though he couldn't tell how serious her injuries were. Her skin was soft, almost velvety, and he marveled at the delicate patterns that seemed to shimmer just beneath the surface. As he worked, Steve couldn't help but wonder about the woman lying on his couch. Who was she? Where had she come from? And most importantly, what had brought her to Earth, to his farm, on this quiet night? He watched over her for hours, the night stretching on endlessly. The questions continued to swirl in his mind, each one more perplexing than the last. But as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, the woman stirred. Steve leaned forward, his heart pounding. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing deep, violet irises that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. She looked at him, her gaze unfocused at first, but then sharpening with a sudden intensity that took Steve by surprise. For a moment neither of them spoke, the silence thick with unspoken questions and the weight of the unknown. Then, in a voice that was soft and melodic, yet filled with an otherworldly resonance, she spoke. "Where am I?" "Gee," she asked, her voice tinged with both confusion and fear. Steve hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "You dear on Earth," he said finally, his voice hoarse from hours of silence. "You crashed? I found you near your ship." She blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to something akin to relief. "Earth?" then she repeated, as if the word itself held some deep significance. "They made it." Steve nodded, still unsure of what to say. He wanted to ask her a million questions: who she was, where she was from, what had happened, but he could see she was still disoriented, her mind struggling to process everything. She tried to sit up, but a wave of pain seemed to wash over her, and she winced, sinking back into the cushions. Steve moved closer, concern etched on his face. "Take it easy," he said gently. "You are hurt, you need to rest." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Then thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Zara. I am not from here." Steve managed a small smile. "I figured as much," she said softly. "My name is Steve. You tear safe here, Zara. I'll do whatever I can to help." Zara nodded, her eyes drifting shut, as exhaustion overtook her once more. Steve watched her for a moment, a strange sense of protectiveness welling up inside him. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain: his quiet, solitary life had just been irrevocably changed. The days after Zara's arrival on Earth passed in a blur of challenges and discoveries, each one a test of her resilience and Steve's patience. As she slowly recovered from the injuries sustained during her crash, Zara found herself grappling with a world that was as alien to her as she was to it. The technology, the culture, even the very air she breathed, it was all strange and bewildering. Steve did everything he could to make her feel at home, though he knew that it was an impossible task. His old farmhouse, with its wooden beams and worn floors, was a far cry from the sleek, sterile environment she was used to on Arendar. The clanking of his outdated appliances, the creaking of the floorboards, even the way the wind whistled through the cracks in the walls, these were all foreign sounds to her. Sounds done. Yet Steve was patient. He understood that Zara was out of her element, that every new day on Earth brought with it a barrage of unfamiliar sensations and experiences. He started with the basics, teaching her how to use the simple things: how to turn on the lights, how to work the stove, how to adjust the temperature of the water in the shower. Each small lesson was a step towards making her feel more comfortable in this strange new world. At first, Zara was overwhelmed. The simplicity of Earth's technology baffled her as she was used to systems that responded to thought, devices that operated with mere gestures. Here, everything required manual effort, knobs to turn, buttons to press. It was clunky, inefficient, and to her mind, primitive. But Steve's gentle encouragement kept her going. He never mocked her confusion, never grew frustrated with her mistakes. Instead, he laughed with her when she accidentally flooded the kitchen by turning on the wrong faucet, or burned toast because she didn't understand how a toaster worked. In return, Zara shared what knowledge she could. She explained the workings of her spacecraft, the technology that powered it, the materials from which it was made. Steve listened, fascinated, though much of it went over his head. Still, he found ways to incorporate her ideas into their everyday life. With Zara's guidance, he managed to enhance some of his tools and improve the efficiency of his farm. The irrigation system, in particular, benefited greatly from her input, and for the first time in years, Steve found himself looking forward to the harvest season with optimism. Despite these small victories, Zara struggled to adapt to the cultural differences. On Arendar, relationships were transactional, alliances formed out of necessity or mutual benefit. Emotions were considered a weakness, something to be controlled and hidden away. Compassion, kindness, love, these were concepts that Zara had heard of but had never truly understood. Her society valued logic, efficiency, and order above all else. But here, on Earth, Zara encountered a different way of living. Steve's kindness bewildered her. At first, she couldn't comprehend why he was helping her without expecting anything in return. She was used to the cold, calculated relationships of Arendar, where every action had an ulterior motive, but Steve's motives were pure, his actions driven by a deep-seated sense of compassion. It confused her, unsettled her even, but it also intrigued her. As the days turned into weeks, Zara found herself growing more comfortable in Steve's presence. The initial awkwardness between them began to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of camaraderie. Steve's quiet humor, his patience, his willingness to listen, these were qualities that Zara had never encountered before, and she found herself drawn to them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Zara and Steve sat on the porch together, watching the day fade into night. The air was cool, the sound of crickets filling the silence between them. Zara had grown to love these quiet moments, when the world seemed to slow down and she could simply exist without the weight of her past pressing down on her. "I never knew a place could be so peaceful," Zara murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Steve glanced at her, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's why I moved out here," he said. "Life is a lot simpler when you're surrounded by nature." Zara nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "On Arendar, we don't have this kind of peace. Everything is calculated. There's no room for quiet moments like this." Steve was silent for a moment, sensing the weight behind her words. "It sounds like a difficult place to live." "And is," Zara admitted. "But it's all I've ever known. Or it was until now." Steve reached out, his hand covering hers. The gesture was simple, but it sent a jolt of warmth through Zara, something unfamiliar and yet not unwelcome. She looked at him, seeing the concern in his eyes, the way he seemed to care so deeply about her, even though they had known each other for such a short time. "Zara," he began, his voice gentle, "you don't have to go back there. You can stay here with me. We'll figure things out together." She smiled, a small, tentative smile that spoke of both hope and uncertainty. "Tie-dye back then," she said softly. "Did that very much." As time passed, Zara found herself adjusting more to life on Earth. The small town of Willow Creek became her new home, its quaint charm and friendly inhabitants slowly winning her over. At first, she was cautious, keeping to herself and avoiding contact with the locals, but Steve encouraged her to interact, to explore, to learn about the world she had landed in. It was not without its challenges. The first time Steve took Zara into town, she was overwhelmed by the sheer number of people. Arendar's society was highly regimented, and public spaces were sparse, controlled environments. Here, everything was chaotic, people moving about with a sense of purpose that was incomprehensible to her, the noise of cars and chatter filling the air. Steve took her to the local diner, a small, cozy place that served as the social hub of the town. The smell of coffee and frying bacon hit Zara the moment they walked in, and she wrinkled her nose in confusion. Food on Arendar was purely functional, synthesized to provide the exact nutrients required by each individual. The concept of eating for pleasure was foreign to her. They sat in a booth by the window, and Steve ordered breakfast for both of them. When the plates arrived, Zara stared at the food in front of her, eggs, toast, and bacon, trying to understand why anyone would choose to eat something so unnecessary. But when she took her first bite, the rich, savory flavors exploded in her mouth. and she found herself strangely drawn to the sensation. "This is different," she said, her eyes wide with surprise. Steve chuckled. "It's not Arender cuisine, that is for sure. But you get used to it." Zara nodded, still trying to wrap her mind around the concept of eating something simply because it tasted good. The experience was oddly comforting, a small step towards understanding the human way of life. But it wasn't just the food that Zara struggled with. Human emotions, so raw and unguarded, were difficult for her to navigate. She had never been taught how to deal with feelings, how to express them, or even how to recognize them in others. On Arender, emotions were seen as a hindrance, something to be suppressed in favor of logic and efficiency. But here on Earth, emotions were everywhere, influencing decisions, shaping relationships, guiding actions. Steve, with his quiet strength and unwavering kindness, became Zarata's guide through this emotional labyrinth. He showed her how to express gratitude, how to offer comfort, how to let herself feel without fear of judgment. It was a slow, sometimes painful process, but Zara was determined to learn. She wanted to understand this world she had landed in, and more than that, she wanted to understand the man who had shown her such kindness. As the weeks turned into months, Zara's fear and uncertainty began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of belonging. She found herself looking forward to each new day, to the quiet moments spent with Steve, to the small, everyday experiences that had once seemed unmiler. The farm became her sanctuary, a place where she could learn and grow without the pressure of urge. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Zara found herself thinking about the traditions of her home planet. On Arender, when someone saved your life, the highest form of gratitude was to propose marriage. It was a tradition steeped in ancient customs, a way to honor the bond that had been forged between the savior and the saved. The idea had seemed strange to her at first, outdated even, but as she thought about all that Steve had done for her, the way he had taken her in, cared for her, helped her adapt to this new world, Zara realized that she wanted to thank him in the warmest meaningful way she knew how. That night, after dinner, Zara sat with Steve on the porch, the cool night air filled with the scent of wildflowers. She had been nervous all day, unsure of how to bring up the subject, but now that the moment had come, she felt a strange sense of calm. "Steve," she began, her voice steady, "there is something I need to talk to you about." Steve turned to her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it, Zara?" She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "On my planet, there is a tradition. When someone saves your life, you are expected to show your gratitude in the most significant way possible. For us, that means proposing marriage." Steve blinked, taken aback by her words. He had grown close to Zara over the past few months, felt a deep connection to her that went beyond friendship, but he hadn't expected this. "By marriage?" "Din," he repeated, his voice tinged with surprise. Zara nodded, her expression earnest. "And I know it sounds strange, and I know that things are different here on Earth, but I've thought about it a lot. You saved my life, Steve. You've shown me kindness and compassion that I've never experienced before. I want to honor that in the way my people would." Steve was silent for a moment, processing her words. He had never imagined that this would be the path their relationship would take, but as he looked into Zara's eyes, he realized that he couldn't deny the feelings he had for her. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, intelligent, curious, resilient, and despite the challenges they had faced, or perhaps because of them, he had come to care for her deeply. "Zara," he said finally, his voice soft, "and I don't know much about Arender traditions, but I do know that I care about you, more than I have cared about anyone in a long time. If this is what you want, then yes, I'll marry you. You." Zara's eyes lit up with a mixture of relief and joy, and she reached out to take his hand. "Then thank you, Steve. I didn't expect to find this kind of connection here, but I am glad I did." The days that followed were a whirlwind of quiet, private preparations. There was no need for a grand ceremony, just a simple exchange of vows, a promise to stand by each other, to navigate the unknown together. The marriage, initially conceived as a gesture of gratitude, soon developed into something deeper, something genuine. The bond between Steve and Zara grew stronger with each passing day, their lives intertwining in ways that neither of them had expected. Zara, with her advanced knowledge and her alien perspective, brought a new dimension to Steve's life, while Steve's earthly wisdom and steady presence grounded Zara in a world that had once seemed so foreign. They continued to work the farm together, blending Zarata's technological innovations with Steve's practical experience. The farm flourished under their combined efforts, and for the first time in years, Steve felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond the physical labor of farming. He had found something more: a partner, a companion, someone who understood him in ways that no one else ever had. For Zara, the farm became more than just a place to live, it became a home, something she had never truly known on Arendar. She had found a sense of belonging that she had never thought possible, a place where she could be herself without fear of judgment or rejection. Their life together was not without its challenges. There were still moments when Zara struggled to understand the intricacies of human emotions, when she felt overwhelmed by the complexities of her new world. But Steve was always there, a steady hand guiding her through the darkness, helping her find her way. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship, evolving into something more profound, more enduring. The love they shared was not the passionate, all-consuming kind that Zara had read about in Earth's literature, but rather a quiet, steady flame that burned brighter with each passing day. It was a love built on trust, respect, and the shared experiences of two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. And so, Zara decided to stay on Earth, to build a life with Steve in the small town of Willow Creek. Together, they created a peaceful existence, one that blended the best of both worlds: Zara's advanced knowledge and Steve's earthy wisdom, the alien and the familiar, the extraordinary and the mundane. It was a life that neither of them had ever expected, but one that they both cherished deeply. And as they stood together, watching the sun set over the fields they had tended side by side, they knew that they had found something rare and precious, something that would last, no matter what the future might hold. The warmth of summer had given way to the crisp, cool embrace of autumn in Willow Creek. The leaves had turned into a brilliant mosaic of reds, oranges, and yellows carpeting the ground in a blaze of color. The once bustling fields had been harvested, leaving behind rows of bare earth that promised rest before the next planting season. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and the distant call of geese preparing for their journey south. In the midst of this tranquil landscape, Zara and Steve's life had settled into a comforting rhythm. Their days were spent tending to the farm, sharing meals, and enjoying the quiet moments that had become the foundation of their relationship. The farm had flourished under their care, a symbol of the life they had built together, a life that was as much Zara's as it was Steve's. What had started as a gesture of gratitude had blossomed into something deeper and more profound. Their love had grown stronger with each passing day, a bond that was no longer defined by their differences but by the harmony they had found together. Zara had come to understand the nuances of human emotion, and Steve had learned to appreciate the complexities of her alien perspective. They had become true partners, each complementing the other in ways neither could have imagined. But it was in the quiet, unspoken moments that their connection truly shone. The way Steve would reach out to touch Zara's hand as they walked through the fields, the way Zara would lean into Steve's embrace as they watched the sunset, these were the moments that defined their love, moments that spoke of a bond that transcended words. One evening, as they sat together by the fireplace, the crackling of the logs filling the room with a comforting warmth, Zara turned to Steve with a thoughtful expression on her face. The firelight danced in her violet eye, casting a instant soft glow on her features. Steve, ever attentive, noticed the shift in her demeanor and set his book aside, giving her his full attention. Steve, Dara began, her voice gentle but tinged with a hint of curiosity. Then there's something I've been thinking about. Something important. Steve raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What is it, Zara? She hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. I had been learning so much about Earth, about your culture, your way of life, but there's one aspect I haven't fully explored yet, something that's essential to understanding what it means to be human. Steve listened intently, sensing the weight of her words. Go on. Zara took a deep breath, her gaze steady. I want to experience the human reproductive system. I want to understand what it means to create life, to bring a new being into this world. I want to do this with you, Steve. Steve was taken aback by her request, though not entirely surprised. He had come to know Zara as someone who approached life with a deep sense of curiosity and a desire to fully understand the world around her. But this was something more, something profound. And are you sure? Steve asked softly, searching her eyes for any sign of doubt. Zara nodded, her expression resolute. Yes, I am. I want to experience this with you, Steve. I want to know what it means to create something together, something that's a part of both of us. Steve reached out, taking her hand in his. I'd be honored, Zara, but you should know this isn't just about biology. It's about creating a life, a bond that will connect us forever. It is a responsibility, but it is also the most beautiful thing we could ever do together. Zara smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest at his words. I know, Steve, and that is why I want to do this. I want to be connected to you in every way possible. I want to build a future with you, one that includes all the possibilities this world has to offer. Steve's heart swelled with love for her, This incredible woman who had come into his life from a world so far away, and yet had become his home. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing away the tears that had begun to fall. "I love you, Zara," Sarah, his voice thick with emotion. "And I want this too, more than anything." Zara smiled, a soft, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. Then let's make it happen," she whispered, leaning in to press her lips against his in a kiss that was both tender and filled with a passion that had been building between them for so long. They made their way back to the farmhouse, their hearts beating in unison, the anticipation in the air growing with each step. Inside, the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, alone in their shared space, their shared love. In the dim light of their bedroom, they stood facing each other, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Steve reached out, his fingers gently brushing the strands of silver hair from Zara's face, tucking them behind her ear. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and longing. Steve, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "Thank you for everything. For being here, for showing me what it means to be human, for loving me." Steve's heart ached with love for her, his hands trembling slightly as he traced the contours of her face. "Zara," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. "You've given me more than I could ever have imagined. I love you more than words can say." Aim. They undressed slowly, reverently, each movement filled with a sense of purpose, of connection. The air between them was charged, electric, as if the very universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for this moment. When they finally came together, it was like two halves of a whole finding their place, fitting perfectly, completing each other in a way that was both physical and spiritual. It was slow, tender, a dance of exploration and discovery. Zara, with her alien physiology, had always been curious about human intimacy, but this was something more. This was an act of love, of trust, of two souls becoming one. She marveled at the sensations, the way her body responded to Steve's touch, the way their breaths mingled, their heartbeats synchronized in a rhythm as old as time. Steve, for his part, was overwhelmed by the depth of his feelings for Zara. He had loved her from the moment he had found her, injured and alone in that strange, glowing spacecraft. But now, as they lay together, their bodies entwined, he realized that his love for her had only grown stronger, deeper, more all-encompassing. She was everything to him, his partner, his lover, his equal. They moved together in perfect harmony, their bodies and minds connected in a way that transcended the physical. Each touch, each kiss, each whispered word was a promise, a commitment to the life they were creating together. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated love, a love that knew no boundaries, no limits. When they finally reached the peak, it was like a burst of light, a fusion of their energies that left them both breathless, their bodies trembling with the intensity of it. They held each other close, their breaths coming in short, ragged gasps, their hearts beating as one. In the quiet aftermath, they lay entwined, their bodies still connected, their hands clasped together. The room was filled with the soft glow of the moonlight. The only sound the gentle rustle of the leaves outside and the soft, steady rhythm of their breathing. Zara rested her head on Steve's chest, listening to the comforting sound of his heartbeat, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his skin. She felt a sense of peace, of contentment, that she had never known before. She had come to Earth as a stranger, an outsider, but now, lying in Steve's arms, she felt like she had finally found her place, her home. Steve, she whispered, her voice filled with love and gratitude. "Thank you." Steve tightened his hold on her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "But for what?" he asked softly. "Pan for everything," Zara replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "Pan for loving me, for making me feel like I belong, for showing me what it means to be truly alive." Steve's heart swelled with love for her, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. "Zara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are my everything. I cannot imagine my life without you." They lay together in silence, the weight of their words settling over them like a warm blanket. They had become one that day in every sense of the word, and the bond they had forged was unbreakable, eternal. As they drifted off to sleep, their bodies still entwined, Zara felt a deep sense of contentment, of fulfillment. She had found something on Earth that she had never expected to find: love, true and unconditional, a love that transcended the boundaries of their worlds. And she knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning of their journey together. And so, as the stars twinkled in the sky above, Zara and Steve began the next chapter of their lives, their hearts and souls forever intertwined. The days that followed were filled with a quiet anticipation, a sense of something new and wonderful blossoming between them. Zara continued her work on the farm, her every movement imbued with a newfound grace, as if she were more in tune with the rhythms of life around her. Steve watched her with a sense of awe and reverence, knowing that they had embarked on a journey that would change their lives forever. As the weeks turned into months, Zara began to notice subtle changes in her body. The advanced physiology of her Arendorian heritage had always made her feel somewhat detached from the human experience, but now she found herself experiencing something entirely new. Her body was adapting, changing, preparing for the life that was growing within her. It was a sensation that was both exhilarating and humbling, a reminder of the profound connection she shared with Steve. One crisp morning, as the first frost of winter glittered on the ground, Zara approached Steve with a soft, almost shy smile. They were standing by the barn, the scent of hay and earth filling the air. Steve was busy tending to the animals, his hands rough and strong from years of hard work. Steve, Sarah said, her voice tinged with excitement. I think I am pregnant. Steve froze, his heart skipping a beat. He turned to look at Zara, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and joy. Are you sure? Zara nodded, her smile growing. Yes, I am sure. I can feel it. I can feel our child growing inside me. For a moment Steve was speechless, overcome by the enormity of what she had just said. Then, without warning, he swept Zara into his arms, spinning her around with a whoop of joy. Zara laughed, a sound that was as light and pure as the morning air. We're going to have a baby, Steve said, his voice thick with emotion as he set her down gently. Zara, this is incredible. Zara placed a hand on her still flat stomach, a look of wonder on her face. They never imagined that this would be possible. But now it feels like the most natural thing possible. The months of Zarata's pregnancy were a time of quiet joy and anticipation. Steve became even more protective of her, making sure she was comfortable, ensuring that she had everything she needed. Zara, in turn, found herself marveling at the changes her body was going through. She felt a deep connection to the life growing inside her, a bond that was as much a part of her Arendorian heritage as it was of her newfound humanity. As her belly grew rounder, Zara experienced the full spectrum of pregnancy, both the joys and the challenges. There were days when she was filled with energy, eager to continue her work on the farm, and others when she felt the weight of her growing. Steve was always there by her side, offering support and comfort, his love for her growing with each passing day. The townspeople of Willow Creek, who had initially been wary of Zarata's otherworldly origins, had come to accept her as one of their own. They marveled at the idea of a human alien child, though they never voiced their curiosity too openly, respecting Zara and Steve's privacy. Instead, they offered small gestures of kindness, a knitted blanket here, a basket of fresh produce, their simple tokens of their acceptance and goodwill. As winter deepened, the farmhouse became a cozy haven, the fire in the hearth a constant source of warmth and light. Zara and Steve spent their evenings planning for the arrival of their child, discussing names, dreaming of the future. They talked about the kind of parents they wanted to be, the life they wanted to give their child, a life filled with love, understanding, and the best of both worlds. One cold night, as snow fell softly outside, Zara felt the first twinges of labor. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a deep, primal urge that seemed to come from the very core of her being. She gasped, clutching Steve's hand, her eyes wide with both fear and excitement. It's time, she whispered, her voice trembling. Steve's heart raced as he sprang into action. He had prepared for this moment, gathering supplies, making sure everything was ready for the birth. But now that it was actually happening, he felt a surge of panic. This was no ordinary birth. Zara was no ordinary woman. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew he had to stay calm, for both their sakes. With gentle, reassuring words, Steve helped Zara to their bedroom, where a bed had been prepared with soft blankets and pillows. The room was warm, lit by the flickering light of the fireplace, casting shadows on the walls that seemed to dance with the rhythm of Zarata's breathing. The labor was long and intense, Zarata's body working through the unfamiliar sensations with a strength that surprised even her. Steve stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, wiping the sweat from her brow. It was a test of their bond, a trial by fire that would forge them into something even stronger than before. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Zara gave one final push, and the room was filled with the sound of a newborn's cry. The noise was sharp, piercing through the silence like a blade, but to Steve and Zara, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Exhausted but elated, Zara collapsed back onto the pillows, her body trembling with both relief and joy. Steve, his hands shaking, gently took the newborn into his arms, his eyes filling with tears as he looked down at their child, a small, wriggling bundle of life that was a perfect blend of them both. The baby had Zara's soft, pale blue skin, but with hints of Steve's earthy tones, creating a unique, delicate hue that shimmered in the firelight. A fine layer of silvery hair covered the baby's head, and when the child opened their eyes, they revealed a deep violet gay voice. "It's a girl," Steve whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he placed the baby in Zarata's waiting arms. Zara looked down at their daughter, tears streaming down her face as she cradled the tiny being she had brought into the world. "She's perfect," she murmured, her voice filled with awe. "She's everything I could have ever dreamed of." Steve leaned down, kissing Zara's forehead, his heart swelling with love and pride. "Dean, you did it, Zara. You brought her into this world? She's our little miracle?" As they sat there, basking in the warmth of the fire and the glow of their newborn daughter, Zara and Steve knew that their lives had changed in the most profound way possible. They were no longer just two beings from different worlds, they were a family bound together by love, by the life they had created together. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, joyful routine. Zara and Steve adjusted to the new rhythm of life with a newborn, learning to balance the demands of parenthood with the responsibilities of the farm. It was not always easy. There were sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and the challenges of raising a child who was a blend of two very different worlds. But through it all, their love for each other and for their daughter remained steadfast. They named her Lyra, after the constellation that had been visible in the sky the night she was born, a reminder of the vast, infinite universe from which Zara had come, and the new life they had created together on Earth. Lyra grew quickly, her bright, curious eyes taking in everything around her with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. As she grew, Lyra began to exhibit traits from both her parents. She had Zarata's intelligence and curiosity, always eager to learn and explore, but she also had Steve's down-to-earth nature, a quiet strength that grounded her in the here and now. She was a child of two worlds, a bridge between the stars and the earth, and her parents marveled at the unique blend of cultures and traits that she embodied. The townspeople of Willow Creek, who had once been wary of Zara, now embraced Lyra as one of their own. They were fascinated by her, but they treated her with the same kindness and acceptance that they had shown to her parents. Lyra, in turn, grew up surrounded by love and community, a child who was as much a part of the town as the farm itself. As the years passed, Zara and Steve continued to build their life together, their bond growing stronger with each new challenge they faced. They taught Lyra the values they held dear: kindness, compassion, curiosity, and instilled in her a love for both the world she lived in and the stars from which she had come. Zara had found harmony and happiness on Earth, a place where she could be herself, where she could love and be loved in return. And as she watched Lyra grow, she knew that she had made the right choice in staying, in building a life with Steve. Together, they had created something beautiful, something that would last beyond the boundaries of time and space. The story of Zara and Steve was not just a tale of love between two beings from different worlds. It was a testament to the power of connection, to the idea that love can bridge even the greatest distances and differences. It was a story of hope, of resilience, of the belief that, no matter where you come from, you can find a place to belong, a place to call home. And so, under the vast, star-filled sky of Willow Creek, Zara, Steve, and Lyra lived a life of peace and joy, a life that was as extraordinary as it was simple, a life that was theirs together.